Before we get started, I just want to say a big thanks to our patrons. If you want to join that, the link is down below in the description. You get a shout out in every video and some other awesome rewards, so make sure to go check that out. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about some beginner level cloth simulations. If you do want a more advanced tutorial, make sure to comment that down below. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure to go do that so you can keep up to date with the latest videos on this channel. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to come in this default scene and delete everything but the camera, like that, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a UV sphere. I'm just going to scale that up a bit and shade smooth like that. So now let's go ahead and add in our actual cloth. That is going to be a plane object. Come up here, just scale that however you want it. And so now let's actually add in the cloth simulation. And so we're going to go down here to this physics tab and then add in the physics for cloth. If we go ahead and come down here and hit play, we will notice that the actual cloth goes past our little UV sphere that we have in our scene, and we don't want that. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure that this sphere is selected. And then in the physics tab again, we're going to come over here and then check mark the collision. If we come back down here and give this a play, we will notice that our actual cloth rests on the top of the UV sphere and actually collides with it. You might notice, however, this doesn't really look like cloth. It kind of looks like a rigid body, and that is actually because we only have 4 vertices in our actual plane. If I go into edit mode real quick, we can notice that we only have 4 vertices, and so we need more geometry to actually have our cloth simulation. So to add more geometry, we're just going to come over here to the modifiers tab. Again, make sure the plane is selected, and then we're just going to go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier. I'm just going to keep mine on simple and turn both of these all the way up. Now if we view this again, you'll notice that nothing has really changed, and that is actually because we have the modifiers out of order. We have this cloth modifier right here, which is actually what our simulation is doing, and so we need this to be before, because right now it's basically taking whatever the cloth simulation is and then adding geometry to that afterwards, but we need to do that before. So we're just going to select this and then drag this above the cloth simulation. Now if we come down to the bottom and press play, we should notice that we have a lot more geometry and it's actually starting to look like cloth. I'm just going to quickly shade smooth just so we get a nice little look. You will notice that there are some jagged edges, but we can go over that later. This was just kind of the first part. Okay, so now that we know the basics of collisions and how to make a basic cloth, we're just going to go ahead and delete these. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in a cylinder. Rotate it on the X. I'm just going to scale it along the Y just so we have something like this. And then again, I'm just going to add in the mesh plane for our cloth. Just going to scale that up, maybe along the X like that, just so we have a little more room to play around with. So now again, I'm just going to walk you guys through this again. So first we gotta enable the cloth like that. If it jumps down here for any reason, that's actually because you're not on the first frame, so you just want to come to the first frame like that. And so now that we have our cloth, we need to make this a collision object, so that is done. And now last thing we need to do is add a subdivision surface modifier, put it on simple, and then crank these up to the max value and move this above our cloth. So now if we give this a play, we should notice that it acts like cloth. But one thing that we will notice down here is that our cloth actually passes through each other. You can see it kind of right here. And so this is not what we want. We actually want the cloth to interact with each other. And so I'm just going to go back to the first frame like this, go back into the physics tab. And now we're going to scroll all the way down to the collisions tab. And so this kind of affects all the collisions of the object. We're just going to come down to this self collision section right here. We don't really need to change around any of these settings right here. These are more for advanced simulations, but for now, we're just going to leave them as the default values. So now if I come back to the first frame and play this animation, we should see that once it gets to where they're coming together, we should see that they now interact with each other and don't collide or anything. If you see for some reason, like mine, the actual planes are sticking together, that is actually because our quality is too low. And so in this collision section, if you have this problem, you just want to come back to the first frame, and I'm just going to double mine to 4. Let's see if that fixes it. So I had to turn my quality up to a 6 in order to fix that, but that is okay. So now that we have this, we now know about self collisions. So this is very important when the cloth wants to fold in on itself and stuff like that. And so now let's go ahead and again delete these 2 objects to move on to the next example. Okay, in this example, we're going to be making some waving flags in the wind. And so let's actually go ahead and add, again, we want to add a plane. I'm just going to move this up here. And then I'm just going to do some basic modeling, try to explain myself as much as possible. Just going to rotate on the X 90 degrees, then go into edit mode, move this up in the Z, then bring this over in the X just so we have a nice and skinny little plane like this. Then if I hold Control and press R, we can set a loop cut, and we just want to set a lot of loop cuts like this. Then you can just let go of that, and in edge select mode we can just select every other edge right here. Then we can just hit E to extrude and Z in the Z axis just to make some flags like this. So now that I have this basic shape, we can go ahead and add in our cloth again. Let me go to the first frame, and then if we play this, we can just notice it falls down. And so we actually want this to be kept in place, and so we're going to do this by adding some pin groups. Pin groups are exactly how they sound. They act like little pins holding certain vertices in place and letting the others flow in the wind or act like normal cloth objects. First, to make a pin group, we need to add a vertex group. So we're going to come to this little menu down here and then add a new vertex group. I'm just going to name mine the flag pin group, like that. And now we can come into edit mode, and then I'm just going to go into vertex select, and I'm going to select these two vertices over here, and then shift and hold shift, and then select these two vertices over here. And so now I have both ends selected like that. And then last thing you want to make sure is to assign this to this pin group. Once we have that, we can go ahead and make our pin group. And so we want to come over here to the physics properties. You want to scroll down until you get to this shape menu, and then you'll see a pin group little thing right here. We just want to select that flag underscore pin vertex group that we just made. So now if I come down to the first frame and play this, we will notice that the sides are actually stationary, whereas the center kind of sags and acts as a cloth. Now for the sake of this tutorial, let's go ahead and add some wind to actually see the cloth moving around a bit. So let's go ahead and add in a force field like that, and I'm just going to add in a simple wind force field. I'm just going to rotate that however I want it, maybe a little bit on the Z. And so this is the cool part about Blender. You can actually see this in real time since we don't have much geometry on this. We can go ahead and play the animation, and we'll notice that nothing really happens, and that is actually because the strength of the wind is too low. So you just want to come over here and play around with the strength and just move that up until you get the effect that you want. So now that we have it looking like this, you will notice that it is very low geometry. So what we're going to do is go ahead and select this, then add a subdivision surface modifier again, going to simple, then just pushing this up all the way and then moving this above cloth. But now if we go to the first frame and play our animation, you will notice that the wind is actually not as strong anymore, and that's actually because we added more geometry, and that I guess makes the weight a little bit stronger on the object. And so a way to change that again is to just play around with these wind settings over here. It's very weird in Blender, but whenever you add a subdivision surface, things like wind and force fields don't affect the objects as much. So I'm just gonna play this animation and then turn the strength of the wind up until I get the effect that I want. So this is looking good. We just have some flags flying in the wind, and this is just an easy way to do that. Okay, now that we have that, we are moving on to our final example. So let's just go ahead and delete the flags and the wind. Okay, for our final example, let's get a little more advanced with it. First, we want to come up to Edit, Preferences, and go to Add-ons and make sure that this add-on is enabled. This is the Ant Landscape add-on. If you just search land, it should pop up. So once that is enabled, we can just go to the mesh section and notice this little landscape icon down here. Once that is opened up, we can come down to this little drop down menu, and then we want to change the subdivisions to a 256 by 256 just to add a little more geometry. And then this noise size, I'm actually going to scale down a bit, just so we get a little more. I think a 0.7 is what I'm going to stick with. And so now that once we have those settings, we can just close out of this. And then I'm just going to go ahead and scale this up a bit, just so we have a little bit more space to work with. It's better for cloth to be bigger than smaller. If it's too small, the cloth simulation might mess up and be all wonky, so you want to make sure it's as big as you can get it. So I'm just going to make mine this big, like this, and then go ahead and add in our plane. I'm just going to scale it up a little bit like this. And so now we can do all these steps like we did before. We can add in the cloth physics, coming over to the modifier tab, subdivision surface simple all the way up on both, like that and place this above the cloth modifier. And then we want to enable self collisions again by coming down here and then going to the collisions tab and enabling self collisions like that. Finally, we just have to make this actual landscape have collision with our cloth, and so we're going to select that and go to collision. So now let's actually play this and see what it looks like. Okay, this is what mine looks like. You can see that it gets caught kind of on that peak right there, and then it slides down the mountain like this. We're actually going to mess around with some of the friction because it does look like it's sliding a little bit too much on this actual landscape. And so first we want to make sure the landscape is selected. We actually have some settings we can mess around here. We don't have any particles in the simulation, so we don't want the particles. We want the soft body and cloth. And so right here we have the friction. We're just going to come and crank this a bit up. And now let's see how that looks. Okay, so this is what this looks like now. We can see that it doesn't slide as much. I still probably would play around with it, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just going to move on. If we actually come down here to our actual cloth, you should see that it is very blocky. One thing we can do is actually right click and shade smooth. That gets rid of some of it, but you will still notice some of these creases right here. And so there are many ways you can fix this, but a way I'm going to do it is to actually come down here to the collisions. I want to change up the quality of the self collisions, so I'm going to change that to 4 first of all. And so now we can actually smooth this out a bit by adding another modifier. We're going to come to the modifiers tab and then add another subdivision surface modifier. This one, however, we want to make sure that it's after our cloth simulation, and this will basically take our cloth simulation, the mesh of that, and then smooth it out after, so it won't affect the actual simulation. If you put it before, it might lead to a better result. But that simulation is going to take exponentially longer to calculate since there's so much more geometry. This time we want to make sure that it's on this mode instead of simple, and then you can just turn that up to however much you want. But now if we view it like this, it looks much better. One final thing I'm going to do to the simulation is actually bake the simulation itself. So if we go into the physics properties again, we can notice this cache section, and cache is basically the term for baking our things into keyframes. And so we want to make sure this is selected, and then you can set your start and end. For the sake of my tutorial, I'm just going to end it at frame 150, but however many frames that you want to have, you want to make sure it's set to that. Then once you have all that set up, you just want to hit this bake button. But after that is baked, we can see that we now have a smoother playback, and if for some reason you didn't like the bake at all, you can always come down here and delete the bake and bake again. So up on the screen right now is the final animation we got for this tutorial. I think it turned out pretty good, and cloth is always fun to play around with, and it's not really that taxing on your hardware. Anyways guys, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, we do have a Patreon and Discord. Links to those can be found in the description below. But anyways guys, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys later. Peace.